Maybe if you spent less time worrying about your little flower arrangements and more time being a real wife, I wouldn't have to explain everything twice. Brandon's voice cut through the warm afternoon air, sharp enough to silence the entire backyard. I stood there holding a platter of grilled vegetables, feeling the eyes of his entire family land on me like spotlights. The smell of charcoal and barbecue sauce suddenly made my stomach turn. My name is Brianna and I am 28 years old. Until that moment at my in-laws' annual summer barbecue in Nashville, I had spent 3 years of marriage convincing myself that the man I married was still somewhere inside the person standing in front of me. But watching him smirk while his relatives shifted uncomfortably in their lawn chairs, something inside me finally cracked. "I was just asking if you wanted me to grab you another drink," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice steady. The platter trembled slightly in my hands. Brandon laughed, but it was the kind of laugh that invited others to join in at my expense. "See what I mean? She doesn't even listen. I said I wanted a beer 10 minutes ago." "A beer, Brianna. Not whatever diet thing you keep pushing on everyone." His mother, Constance, let out a small chuckle from her spot under the patio umbrella. His father, Gregory, just shook his head like he was embarrassed for me. The cousins, aunts, and uncles scattered around the backyard either looked away or whispered to each other. I had become the entertainment, and not one of them was going to say a word. That was when I noticed him. Ethan, Brandon's cousin from Atlanta, who I had only met twice before at family functions. He was standing near the fence, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with an expression I could not quite read. He was not laughing. He was not looking away. "Brandon, that's enough." Ethan's voice was calm but firm, cutting through the awkward silence like a blade. He pushed off from the fence and walked toward us. "She asked you a simple question. There's no reason to talk to her like that." Brandon's expression shifted from smug to annoyed. "Stay out of it, Ethan. This is between me and my wife. Then maybe treat her like she's your wife and not someone you hired to fetch things." Ethan stopped a few feet away, his jaw tight. "If you don't appreciate her, let her go. I'd die for a woman like her." The backyard went completely still. Even the cicadas seemed to pause their endless humming. I felt my face flush, but not from embarrassment this time. Something else was spreading through my chest, warm and unfamiliar. Recognition. Someone had finally seen what I had been hiding from myself for years. Brandon sputtered, clearly not expecting anyone to challenge him in front of his family. "What did you just say to me?" "You heard me." Ethan did not back down. His dark eyes moved from Brandon to me, and in that brief glance, I saw something that made my heart stutter. Concern. Genuine, undiluted concern. I set the platter down on the nearest table, my hand still shaking, but for a different reason now. The weight of what I knew pressed against my ribs. Brandon's affair. The text messages I had discovered 3 months ago on his phone while he was in the shower. The late nights he claimed were work emergencies. The perfume on his collar that was not mine. I had been carrying this secret, hoping it would disappear, hoping he would come back to me, hoping for something that was never going to happen. But standing there in that backyard, watching my husband's face twist with indignation while his cousin defended my honor, I realized something fundamental had shifted. I was done hoping. "Brianna." Brandon's voice was sharp now, commanding, "Go inside and get me that beer. We'll talk about this later." Later. That was always his solution. Push the problem away. Deal with it when no one was watching. Make me feel like I was the unreasonable one for having feelings. I looked at Ethan, then back at Brandon, and finally at the faces of all these people who had watched my husband humiliate me without saying a single word in my defense. "No," I said softly. Brandon blinked. "Excuse me." I said, "No." My voice grew stronger. "I'm not going inside, and we're not talking about this later." The silence that followed felt like the moment before a storm breaks. I did not know exactly what I was going to do next, but I knew with absolute certainty that everything was about to change. Looking back now, I can trace the unraveling of my marriage to a series of small moments I chose to ignore. The way Brandon stopped asking about my day, the distance that grew between us in bed inch by inch until we were sleeping like strangers sharing a mattress. The dismissive tone that crept into his voice whenever I talked about my work at Brightville Landscape Design, the company where I had spent 5 years building a career I was genuinely proud of. I had met Brandon when I was 24, fresh out of a long-term relationship that ended badly and hungry for something stable. He was charming back then, attentive in ways that felt almost overwhelming. He brought me flowers without occasion, remembered the small things I mentioned in passing, and looked at me like I was the most fascinating person in any room. We married after 18 months of dating. My mother had cautioned me that it was too fast, that I barely knew him, but I was convinced I had found my person. Brandon made me feel chosen in a way I had never experienced before. What I did not realize at the time was that his intensity had an expiration date. The first year was good. We moved into a small house on the east side of Nashville, and I threw myself into making it a home. Brandon worked as a regional sales manager for an agricultural equipment company, which meant long hours and occasional travel. I filled the gaps with my own career, pouring energy into designing outdoor spaces for clients who trusted my vision. By the second year, things started to change. Brandon grew irritable when I talked about my projects. He made comments about how my job was not a real job, just playing with plants. At first, I laughed it off, thinking he was joking. Then, I started to notice that he never asked follow-up questions, never wanted to see photos of finished installations, never celebrated my wins. When I landed the Henderson account, a massive residential redesign that took me 6 months to complete and earned me a promotion, Brandon's response was to ask what was for dinner. I remember standing in our kitchen, still buzzing with excitement from the client's glowing feedback and watching my husband scroll through his phone without looking up. "That's great, babe," he had said, his voice flat. "So, dinner?" I should have said something then. I should have told him that his indifference hurt, that I needed him to care about the things that mattered to me. Instead, I made pasta and told myself he was just tired from work. The affair started sometime in the second half of year 2. I did not have proof then, just a gnawing feeling in my gut that something was wrong. Brandon started working late more often. He became protective of his phone, angling it away from me whenever a notification popped up. He took calls in the garage and came back inside with excuses that never quite added up. I confronted him once carefully, trying not to sound accusatory. "Is everything okay at work? You seem stressed." "Everything's fine," he had said, kissing my forehead like I was a child who needed reassurance. "Just a lot going on right now. Don't worry about it." So, I did not worry about it. Or rather, I buried the worry deep enough that I could function, could smile at family dinners, could pretend that my marriage was not slowly dying in front of me. The messages I found 3 months ago changed everything. Brandon had left his phone on the bathroom counter while he showered, and it buzzed with a notification. I glanced at it instinctively, expecting something mundane. What I saw was a text from someone named Vanessa that said, "Last night was incredible. Can't wait to see you again." My hands went cold. I picked up the phone, heart pounding, and scrolled through the conversation. There were dozens of messages spanning weeks, explicit photos, plans to meet at hotels during his business trips, pet names, and inside jokes that made my stomach heave. I put the phone back exactly where I found it and walked out of the bathroom on numb legs. When Brandon emerged from the shower, toweling off his hair with that same casual confidence he always had, I told him I was going to run some errands. I drove to a park 3 m from our house, sat in my car, and cried until I could not breathe. Then I wiped my face, started the engine, and drove back home. I never said a word. For 3 months, I watched my husband lie to my face with practiced ease. I studied his patterns, noted the dates he claimed to be traveling, cross-referenced them with credit card statements he did not know I could access. I built a mental file of evidence while serving him breakfast and asking about his day like nothing had changed. People might wonder why I did not leave immediately. The truth is complicated. Part of me was in shock. Part of me was terrified of what my life would look like without him. And part of me, the part one I'm least proud of, kept hoping he would stop, that he would choose me, that the man I married would somehow come back. Standing in that backyard, watching Brandon sneer at me while his family averted their eyes, I finally understood that man was never coming back. Maybe he never existed at all. The cousin's eyes found mine again across the suddenly quiet backyard, and I felt the weight of a truth I had been avoiding for months settle into my bones. Ethan knew something. The way he had spoken up, the specific edge in his voice when he challenged Brandon, the almost protective stance he had taken near me since arriving at the barbecue. This was not just a cousin defending family honor. This was something else. Brandon was still sputtering, his face reeling with anger and embarrassment. "Who do you think you are, Ethan? Coming into my parents' house and disrespecting me like that?" "I think I'm someone who was raised to treat women with basic decency," Ethan replied evenly. "Something you seem to have forgotten." The other family members were starting to shift uncomfortably. Gregory had set down his beer and was watching his son with an expression I could not quite decipher. Constance kept looking between Brandon and Ethan like she was waiting for someone to tell her how to react. Brandon's sister, Mallory, had gathered her 2 young children and was herding them toward the house, clearly wanting to remove them from whatever was about to happen. "This is ridiculous." Brandon turned to me, his voice dropping to something that was probably meant to sound reasonable, but came out as a threat. "Brianna, let's go home. We're leaving." I did not move. "Brianna," his tone sharpened. I said, "We're leaving now." "I heard you." My voice came out steadier than I expected. "I'm not ready to leave." Brandon's jaw tightened. This was new territory for us. In 3 years of marriage, I had never openly defied him in front of his family. I had always smoothed things over, made excuses, preserved his image even when he was tearing mine apart in private. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "Stay here and embarrass yourself. I'll be in the car." He stalked toward the side gate that led to the driveway, not bothering to say goodbye to anyone. The silence he left behind was suffocating. I could feel everyone waiting for me to follow him, to apologize for the scene, to restore the comfortable fiction that everything was normal. But I was so tired of carrying that weight. "I'm sorry," Constance finally said, her voice thin. "I don't know what's gotten into him today." I looked at my mother-in-law, this woman who had watched her son belittle me countless times without ever saying a word, and felt something close to pity. "Yes, you do," I said quietly. "You all do." No one responded. The accusation hung in the air, undeniable and uncomfortable. Ethan appeared at my side, his presence warm and solid. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" he asked, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "Privately?" I nodded, grateful for an excuse to step away from the scrutiny of Brandon's family. We walked together toward the far corner of the yard, past the elaborate flower beds that Constance hired professionals to maintain until we were out of earshot. "I need to tell you something," Ethan said, his expression troubled. "And I'm not sure how to say it without making things worse." "I don't think things can get much worse right now," I replied with a bitter laugh. He ran a hand through his dark hair, clearly wrestling with his words. "Brandon and I aren't close. You probably noticed that. We grew up on opposite ends of the family. Saw each other maybe once a year at most. But I still hear things. Family talks, you know." I waited, my heart beginning to race. A few months ago, I was at a work conference in Dallas. Brandon was there, too. Same hotel, different event. I ran into him in the lobby. Ethan paused, his jaw tightening. "He was with a woman, not you, and they weren't exactly being discreet about what they were doing there together." The confirmation hit me like a physical blow, even though I already knew. Hearing it from someone else, someone who had witnessed it firsthand, made it suddenly terribly real. "I'm sorry," Ethan continued, his voice rough with genuine regret. "I should have said something sooner. I didn't know how to bring it up or if it was even my place. But after what just happened, watching him talk to you like that in front of everyone. He shook his head. You deserve to know that you're not crazy. Whatever you've been feeling, whatever doubts you've had about him, they're justified. I felt tears prick at my eyes. But I refused to let them fall. Not here. Not yet. Her name is Vanessa, I said flatly. I found the messages 3 months ago. I know everything. Ethan's eyes widened slightly. You knew, and you stayed? I stayed because I was scared. The admission cost me something, but it also felt like releasing a breath I had been holding for too long. I stayed because I thought maybe if I was patient enough, good enough, he would change. I stayed because leaving felt like failing. It's not failing to walk away from someone who doesn't value you, Ethan said firmly. It's surviving. I looked at him then. Really looked at him. The earnest concern in his eyes, the way he stood close enough to offer support, but far enough to respect my space. The simple fact that he had been the only person to speak up for me all afternoon. This man, who I barely knew, had shown me more respect in 10 minutes than my husband had in the past year. Something shifted inside me. Not a decision exactly, but the clearing away of fog that had kept me from seeing the path forward. I knew what I needed to do now. The only question was whether I was brave enough to do it. From the driveway, I heard Brandon's car horn honk impatiently. He's waiting, Ethan said, though his tone made it clear he was not suggesting I go. I straightened my shoulders and lifted my chin. Let him wait. The car horn honked again, longer this time, more insistent. I could picture Brandon sitting behind the wheel, his face flushed with anger, convinced that I would come running the moment he summoned me. That was how it had always worked before. He would make a demand and I would comply. He would raise his voice and I would lower mine. The dance was so familiar that I had stopped noticing we were even doing it. But something had fundamentally changed in the last hour. Maybe it was Ethan's defense of me. The first time anyone in Brandon's family had acknowledged that his behavior was wrong. Maybe it was finally hearing confirmation of the affair from someone who had witnessed it firsthand. Or maybe I had simply reached the end of a rope I did not even realize I had been clinging to. You should go back to the party, I told Ethan. I don't want to cause more drama for you with the family. He shook his head. I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about you. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. What are you going to do? It was a simple question, but it contained multitudes. What was I going to do about Brandon waiting in the car? What was I going to do about our marriage? What was I going to do about the life I had built around a man who apparently saw me as little more than a convenience to be discarded when something shinier came along? I don't know yet, I admitted. But I'm not going to that car. Not right now. The horn blared a third time, followed by the sound of a car door slamming. Footsteps on gravel. Brandon appeared around the corner of the house. His face a storm cloud of fury. What the hell, Brianna? I've been waiting for 15 minutes. We're leaving now. No. The word came out calm, almost detached. I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. Brandon stopped short, clearly not expecting resistance. Excuse me. I said, no, I'm not leaving with you right now. I need some time to think. Think about what? He threw his hands up in exasperation. What is there to think about? You're my wife. We came together. We leave together. That's how this works. I felt Ethan shift beside me. A subtle movement that positioned him slightly between me and Brandon. The protective gesture did not go unnoticed by my husband. Oh, I see what's happening here. Brandon's eyes narrowed as he looked between us. You've been talking to him, haven't you? Filling your head with garbage. What did he tell you? Nothing I didn't already know, I replied. Something flickered in Brandon's expression. Just for a moment, I saw a flash of fear behind the anger. He knew. He knew that I knew. The question was whether he would continue to deny it or finally drop the act. He chose denial. I don't know what you think you know. But you're being ridiculous. This whole scene is embarrassing. My entire family is watching. He gestured vaguely toward the backyard where I could see several relatives hovering near the patio, clearly trying to observe without being obvious about it. Good, I said. Maybe they should see who you really are. Brandon's face went from red to nearly purple. Who I really am. I'm the one who works 60 hours a week to support us. I'm the one who pays the mortgage on our house. I'm the one who puts up with your obsession with plants and dirt while you play at having a career. And this is the thanks I get. The old Brianna would have crumbled under this assault. She would have felt the familiar shame of being called out, would have questioned whether she was being unreasonable, would have apologized just to make the conflict stop. But I was not the old Brianna anymore. My obsession with plants and dirt pays for the cars in our driveway, I said quietly. My career contributed to the down payment on that house. And as for putting up with me, you seem to find plenty of comfort elsewhere when I wasn't enough for you. The color drained from Brandon's face. What are you talking about? Vanessa. I let the name hang in the air between us. The woman you've been sleeping with for the past 8 months. The one you meet at hotels during your business trips. The one who sends you photos that would make your mother faint. Brandon's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. Behind him, I saw Constance step onto the patio, close enough now to hear the conversation. Her face had gone pale. I found the messages 3 months ago. I continued, my voice gaining strength. I know about the hotel in Dallas, the weekend in Memphis, the apartment she has downtown that you visit every Thursday when you claim you're working late. I was guessing about some of these details, extrapolating from the pattern of lies I had documented, but his expression told me I was hitting close to the truth. Brandon's voice had shifted from anger to something more desperate. You don't understand. It wasn't what you think. She means nothing to me. It was a mistake. A mistake that lasted 8 months. I shook my head slowly. A mistake you kept making over and over again while you came home and criticized everything I did. While you made me feel like I was the problem in our marriage. I can explain. I don't want your explanations. I felt tears threatening again, but this time they were tears of release rather than pain. I want you to leave me alone. Right now, tonight, I need you to go away and let me think. Brandon looked like he wanted to argue, but something in my expression must have stopped him. Or maybe it was Ethan's presence, a silent witness to his unraveling, or the awareness that his mother was now within earshot, about to hear things that would shatter whatever image he had carefully cultivated. Fine, he said finally, his voice brittle. Fine, take your time. Think about whatever you need to think about. But this isn't over, Brianna. We're going to talk about this. We will, I agreed, but not tonight. He stood there for another long moment, clearly struggling with the loss of control. Then he turned and walked back toward the driveway. A minute later, I heard his car engine start and the crunch of gravel as he drove away. I let out a breath I did not realize I had been holding. My legs felt suddenly weak, and I reached out to steady myself on the fence. Are you okay? Ethan asked, his voice gentle. No, I said. Honestly. But I think I'm going to be. The aftermath of Brandon's departure was surprisingly quiet. The family members who had been watching from the patio retreated back to their seats, their conversations resuming in hushed tones. Constance had disappeared into the house, and I could only imagine what she was thinking, what stories she was already constructing to protect her son's reputation. Ethan stayed with me by the fence, a solid presence that I was more grateful for than I could express. We did not talk for several minutes, just stood there in the fading afternoon light, letting the adrenaline drain from our systems. Do you have somewhere to go tonight? He finally asked. I mean, if you don't want to go home. I had not thought that far ahead. The house I shared with Brandon suddenly felt like hostile territory. A place where I would have to face his belongings, his smell, the bed we had shared while he was betraying me with another woman. My friend Jasmine lives about 20 minutes from here, I said slowly. I could probably stay with her. That's good. You shouldn't be alone right now. Ethan paused, then added, and I don't mean that in a weird way. I just mean you've had a lot thrown at you today. Having someone to talk to might help. I turned to look at him, really studying his face for the first time. He had the same strong jaw as Brandon, the same dark hair, but everything else was different. Where Brandon's eyes were calculating, always assessing situations for his own advantage, Ethan's held a warmth that seemed genuine, where Brandon's smile was often a weapon, a tool for manipulation. Ethan's expression was open, almost earnest. Why did you speak up earlier? I asked. At the barbecue, when Brandon was humiliating me. No one else said anything. They never do. Ethan looked away, his jaw tightening, because I'd been in that position before. Not exactly the same, but similar enough. I know what it feels like to be belittled by someone who's supposed to love you, and to have everyone around you pretend it's not happening. You were married, engaged, 3 years ago. He paused, searching for the right words. She was very good at making me feel like I was never good enough. Nothing I did was right. The way I dressed, the way I talked, my job, my friends, everything was wrong. And I kept trying to fix myself, to become whatever she wanted until I realized that she didn't actually want me to succeed. She wanted me to fail so she could feel superior. What happened? I finally woke up and ended. It cost me a lot, not just financially, but emotionally. My family didn't understand. They thought I was throwing away a good thing. He shrugged. But I knew that if I stayed, I would lose myself completely. Some things aren't worth that price. His words resonated deep in my chest, echoing my own feelings about my marriage. I had been so busy trying to be the wife Brandon wanted that I had lost sight of who I was before him. The confident young woman who had graduated top of her class in landscape architecture. The creative spirit who found joy in transforming barren spaces into living works of art. The friend, the daughter, the person who had her own dreams and ambitions. Can I tell you something else? Ethan's voice dropped lower, more serious. Something you might not want to hear. I braced myself. Go ahead. When I saw Brandon at that hotel in Dallas, I didn't just see him with that woman. I overheard part of their conversation. They were talking about money. Your money specifically. A chill ran down my spine. What do you mean? The woman, Vanessa, she was asking him about your finances, how much you made at your job, what assets you had, whether there was a prenup, and Brandon was telling her everything. He even mentioned some investment account you had opened. Said he was planning to transfer funds from it. My blood went cold. The investment account. I had opened it 2 years ago with an inheritance from my grandmother, keeping it separate from our joint finances specifically because my mother had warned me to always have my own money just in case. Brandon knew about it, but I had never given him access. Or so I thought. I checked our accounts obsessively after I found out about the affair, I said, my mind racing. I didn't see any unusual withdrawals. Maybe he hasn't done it yet. Or maybe he found another way. Ethan's expression was grave. Look, I'm not trying to scare you, but based on what I heard, this isn't just an affair. He's planning something, and you need to protect yourself. The implications of his words crashed over me like a wave. All this time, I had been focused on the emotional betrayal, the lies about another woman. But what if Brandon's deception went deeper than that? What if the entire marriage had been a calculated move to access my finances, my career, my potential? I thought about how he had discouraged me from involving my family in our finances. How he had insisted on being the one to handle our taxes, how he had casually suggested more than once that I add his name to my grandmother's investment account for convenience. I need to talk to a lawyer. I said, the words feeling surreal even as I spoke them. Tomorrow, first thing. That's smart. Ethan nodded. Do you want me to come with you for support? I hesitated. A few hours ago, I barely knew this man. Now he was offering to accompany me to meet with a divorce attorney. The speed of everything felt dizzying. Let me think about it, I said finally. But thank you for everything today. You didn't have to get involved, and you did anyway. Yes, I did. His voice was firm. Someone should have stood up for you a long time ago. I'm just sorry it took this long. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that would have made me reach for my camera on any other day. But beauty felt irrelevant right now, drowned out by the weight of everything I had learned in the past few hours. Ethan had offered to drive me to Jasmine's house, and after a moment of internal debate, I accepted. My own car was parked at Brandon's parents' house, and the thought of going back inside to get my keys of facing Constance and the rest of the family felt unbearable. We walked to his rental car in silence, the gravel crunching beneath our feet. I could feel eyes on us from the house, probably relatives peering through curtains. Desperate to piece together the drama they had witnessed. Let them look. Let them gossip. I was beyond caring about their opinions. In the car, with the air conditioning humming softly and the familiar streets of Nashville passing by outside the window, I felt something close to calm settle over me. Not peace exactly, more like the stillness that comes after a storm. When the destruction is visible, but the chaos has passed. Can I ask you something? I said, breaking the silence. Anything. When you said that thing earlier about dying for a woman like me, did you mean it, or were you just trying to provoke Brandon? Ethan was quiet for a moment, his eyes fixed on the road. I meant it, he said finally. Not in a romantic way, not like that. I barely know you, but I meant it in the sense that you deserve someone who sees your worth, who appreciates what you bring to a relationship, who would go to the ends of the earth to make you feel valued. He glanced at me briefly. You deserve that, Brianna. Everyone does. His words settled into me, filling spaces I had not realized were empty. For so long, I had accepted Brandon's version of reality. His constant implication that I was lucky to have him, that no one else would want me, that my contributions were inferior to his. Hearing someone articulate the opposite, even a relative stranger, felt like stepping into sunlight after years in a dark room. Thank you, I said softly, for saying that. It's just the truth. We drove the rest of the way in comfortable silence. When we pulled up to Jasmine's townhouse, I could see lights on inside, and I felt a wave of relief that she was home. Are you going to be okay from here? Ethan asked as I unbuckled my seatbelt. I think so. I paused with my hand on the door handle. Listen, I know we barely know each other, but what you did today, it changed something for me. It made me realize that I've been accepting treatment I never should have tolerated. So, thank you for that. He nodded slowly. If you need anything, anything at all, here's my number. He pulled out his phone and I gave him mine. A moment later, my phone buzzed with his contact information. I'll let you know how the lawyer meeting goes, I said. Please do. And Brianna. He waited until I met his eyes. Be careful. If Brandon is really planning something with your finances, he might escalate when he realizes you're not coming back. People like that, they don't handle losing control very well. The warning sent a shiver down my spine. But I nodded. I'll be careful. Jasmine answered the door within seconds of my knock, took one look at my face, and pulled me into a fierce hug without asking any questions. That was the kind of friend she was. She led me inside, sat me down on her couch, pressed a glass of wine into my hands, and then said simply, "Tell me everything." So, I did. I told her about the barbecue, about Brandon's humiliation, about Ethan's intervention. I told her about the affair with Vanessa, the messages I had discovered, the months of silence I had endured. And I told her about Ethan's revelation regarding the overheard conversation, the questions about my finances, the possible financial scheming that went beyond simple infidelity. By the time I finished, the wine bottle was empty, and Jasmine's expression had shifted from sympathy to fury. I always knew there was something off about him, she said, her voice tight. The way he talked to you at parties, like you were a child who needed to be managed. The way he would shut down whenever you mentioned your work. I wanted to say something so many times, but I didn't want to overstep. I wish you had, I admitted. Maybe I would have woken up sooner. Maybe. Or maybe you needed to see it for yourself. She reached over and squeezed my hand. The important thing is you see it now and you're not going back. It was not a question, but I answered it anyway. No, I'm not going back. We stayed up late into the night making lists and forming plans. Jasmine knew a divorce attorney from her work in real estate, someone who specialized in cases involving hidden assets and financial deception. She promised to call first thing in the morning and get me an emergency consultation. I texted Ethan before I fell asleep. Just a simple message thanking him again and letting him know I was safe. He responded within minutes. Glad you're okay. Get some rest. Tomorrow is a big day. Lying on Jasmine's guest bed, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, I felt something I had not experienced in years. Clarity. The fog of doubt and self-blame that had clouded my judgment for so long was finally lifting. I could see my marriage for what it really was now. Not a partnership, but a cage. Not love, but control. The road ahead would not be easy. I knew that there would be lawyers and paperwork and probably ugly confrontations with Brandon as he realized I was serious about leaving. There might be financial losses if he had already started siphoning money. There would definitely be judgment from his family who would find ways to blame me for the destruction of the marriage. But for the first time since my wedding day, I was not afraid. I was angry, yes, hurt, absolutely, but beneath all of that, I felt something stronger, something that had been dormant for too long. I felt free. The morning after the barbecue, I woke with a strange sense of purpose that had been absent from my life for longer than I cared to admit. Jasmine was already up, coffee brewing, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke in the clipped professional tone she reserved for business matters. Yes, today if possible. It's urgent. She glanced at me and gave a thumbs up. 2 o'clock works perfectly. Thank you so much. She hung up and turned to me with a grim smile. You have an appointment with Diane at Hawthorne Legal Associates this afternoon. She's one of the best divorce attorneys in Nashville and she doesn't mess around. Thank you, I said, meaning it with every fiber of my being. I don't know what I would do without you. You'd figure it out. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for. She poured me a cup of coffee and sat down across from me at her small kitchen table. But you don't have to figure it out alone. That's what friends are for. My phone buzzed with a text message. I expected it to be from Ethan, checking in as he had promised, but instead it was from Brandon. We need to talk. Come home. Please. That was new. In 3 years of marriage, I could count on one hand the number of times Brandon had used that word with me. The desperation behind it was almost satisfying. A small confirmation that my departure had rattled him in ways he had not anticipated. I did not respond. Another message came through seconds later. I know I messed up. I can explain everything. Just give me a chance. Then another. Brianna, answer me. This is ridiculous. You're my wife. And another. Fine. If you won't come home, I'm coming to find you. We're going to have this conversation whether you like it or not. A chill ran through me as I read the final message. The threatening undertone was unmistakable. This was not the pleading of a remorseful husband. This was the frustration of a man who was losing control of a situation he had expected to dominate. He's threatening to come find me, I told Jasmine, showing her the messages. Her expression hardened. He doesn't know you're here, does he? I don't think so, but he could probably figure it out. He knows you're my closest friend. Then we need to be smart about this. Jasmine was already moving, grabbing her keys from the counter. You're not staying here alone today. You're coming with me to my office and then we're going straight to that lawyer appointment. If he shows up here, he'll find an empty house. I appreciated her protective instinct, but I also felt a rising anger at the situation. Why should I have to hide? Why should I have to arrange my movements around Brandon's unpredictable temper? I had done nothing wrong. He was the one who had betrayed our vows, who had lied and schemed and treated me like a possession rather than a partner. I'm not going to run from him forever, I said firmly. But you're right. Today, I need to focus on protecting myself legally. The confrontation can wait. We left Jasmine's townhouse through the back door just in case Brandon was already watching the front. It felt paranoid, but Ethan's warning about escalation echoed in my mind. People who are losing control can become dangerous. I was not going to underestimate what Brandon might do when he realized his carefully constructed world was crumbling. The morning passed in a blur of coffee and distraction at Jasmine's real estate office. Her colleagues were kind enough not to ask questions, though I caught a few curious glances. I spent most of the time on my phone researching divorce proceedings in Tennessee and making notes about the financial documents I would need to gather. At 1:30, Jasmine drove me to Hawthorne Legal Associates, a sleek office building in downtown Nashville. Diane turned out to be a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that immediately put me at ease. "Tell me everything," she said after we had settled into her office. "Start from the beginning and don't leave anything out." So I told her the affair, the financial concerns Ethan had overheard, the years of emotional manipulation, the public humiliation at the barbecue. Diane listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad, her expression revealing nothing. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and fixed me with a direct gaze. "First things first, do you have access to your financial records, bank statements, investment accounts, tax returns?" "Some of them. Brandon handled most of our finances, but I have my own accounts that he doesn't control." "Good. That's smart." She made another note. "Here's what we need to do immediately. First, we freeze any joint accounts so he can't drain them before the divorce is finalized. Second, we get copies of every financial document you can access. Third, we document everything. Every threatening text, every piece of evidence of the affair, every instance of his controlling behavior. And if he's already moved money around," Diane's smile was thin but confident. "Then we find it. Forensic accountants are very good at their jobs. If your husband has been hiding assets or planning to defraud you, we will uncover it." The next 2 weeks were the most intense of my life. Diane moved with the precision of a general executing a battle plan, filing paperwork, issuing subpoenas, and coordinating with a forensic accountant who began combing through every financial record associated with my marriage. What we found was worse than I had imagined. Brandon had not just been planning to access my investment account. He had already done it using forged documents. He had added himself as a co-signer 6 months ago and had been slowly transferring funds to a separate account in his name alone. The total amount missing was nearly $40,000. Money my grandmother had left me specifically because she wanted me to have security and independence. But the forensic accountant discovered something else. Something that transformed my anger into cold, calculated determination. The account Brandon had been funneling money into was not just in his name. It was jointly held with Vanessa. They were planning a future together using my money. "This changes everything," Diane said when she delivered the news. "We're not just looking at divorce now. We're looking at fraud. Criminal fraud." I sat in her office staring at the documents spread across her desk, feeling a strange numbness settle over me. Part of me wanted to cry. Part of me wanted to scream. But a larger part, a part that had been growing stronger every day since I left that barbecue, wanted justice. "What are my options?" I asked. "We can pursue this through civil court as part of the divorce proceedings, or we can involve law enforcement. Given the amount of money and the clear evidence of forgery, I would recommend both." "Do it." My voice was steady. "I want him to face consequences for what he's done." Diane nodded approvingly. "I was hoping you'd say that." The following days were a whirlwind of legal activity. I filed a police report documenting the fraud. Diane served Brandon with divorce papers that included a detailed accounting of the missing funds and a demand for their immediate return. And I finally changed the locks on the house that was in my name because I had inherited it from my grandmother along with the investment account. Brandon had been living in my house, spending my money, and planning to leave me for another woman. The irony was not lost on me. His reaction to the divorce papers was predictable. He called me 17 times in 1 hour, leaving increasingly frantic voicemails that ranged from pleading to threatening. When I did not respond, he showed up at Jasmine's townhouse, pounding on the door and demanding to speak with me. Jasmine called the police. They escorted him away with a warning, and Diane immediately filed for a restraining order. Throughout all of this, Ethan remained a steady presence. We texted daily and he called every few nights to check on my well-being. He had returned to Atlanta after the barbecue, but made it clear that he was available if I needed anything. His support was uncomplicated and genuine, asking nothing in return, expecting nothing from me except that I take care of myself. "How are you holding up?" he asked during one of our evening calls. "Better than I expected," I admitted. "Having a plan helps. Knowing that he's going to face real consequences helps more. You're handling this with incredible strength. I hope you know that." "I don't feel strong. I feel angry and tired and sad sometimes when I think about how much time I wasted on someone who never really loved me." "Those feelings make sense," Ethan said gently. "But you're not wasting time anymore. You're building a new life. That's something to be proud of." His words stayed with me long after we hung up. Building a new life. It sounded daunting, but also exhilarating. For the first time in years, my future was not determined by Brandon's expectations or demands. It was mine to shape however I chose. The final confrontation came 3 weeks after the barbecue in the courtroom where our divorce proceedings were being heard. Brandon sat at the opposite table with his own attorney, his face a mask of barely contained fury. Vanessa was notably absent, having apparently fled town when she learned that criminal charges were being considered against both of them for the fraud. Diane presented our case with devastating precision. The forged documents, the bank records showing systematic transfers, the joint account with Vanessa, the timeline of deception that stretched back nearly a year. By the time she finished, even Brandon's attorney looked defeated. The judge's ruling was everything I had hoped for. Brandon was ordered to return all misappropriated funds immediately, plus interest. He was stripped of any claim to the house or my personal assets. And most satisfying of all, the court referred the matter to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution. As the judge delivered the verdict, I watched Brandon's face crumble. The arrogance that had defined him for so long dissolved into something smaller, more pathetic. He looked like a man watching his entire world collapse. And in that moment, I felt no sympathy, only vindication. "This isn't over," he hissed as we filed out of the courtroom. "You think you've won, but you haven't. I'll appeal. I'll fight this." I stopped and turned to face him, meeting his eyes without flinching. "No, you won't. Because if you do, every piece of evidence we have goes public. The affair, the fraud, all of it. Your family, your colleagues, everyone you've ever tried to impress will know exactly who you are." His face went pale. "You wouldn't try me." I held his gaze for a long moment, watching the fight drain out of him. Then I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the courthouse hallway. Outside, the Nashville sun was warm on my face. Jasmine was waiting on the steps, and she cheered when she saw my expression. "We won. We won." She hugged me fiercely and I let myself sink into the embrace, feeling the tension of the past weeks finally begin to release. It was over. Not the healing, not the work of rebuilding my life, but the battle, the war I had not even known I was fighting until Ethan spoke up at that barbecue and showed me that I deserved better. Speaking of Ethan, my phone buzzed with a text from him. "How did it go?" I smiled as I typed my response. "Better than I could have imagined. Thank you for everything." His reply came quickly. "You did all the hard work. I just gave you a push." That evening, I sat on the porch of my grandmother's house, my house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and amber. The air smelled like honeysuckle and fresh-cut grass. Scents that reminded me of childhood summers spent in this very spot, dreaming about the life I would someday build, the life I was finally building now. Ethan called as the last light faded from the sky. We talked for over an hour about everything and nothing, about his work in Atlanta and my plans for expanding my landscape design business, about the future and what it might hold. There was no pressure, no expectations, just the easy conversation of two people who had found an unexpected connection in the midst of chaos. "I'm thinking about coming back to Nashville next month," he said near the end of our call. "There's a project I'm consulting on. Maybe we could get dinner." I smiled into the phone. "I'd like that." After we hung up, I stayed on the porch for a while longer, letting the night settle around me. The crickets sang their endless song, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. Ordinary sounds of an ordinary evening. And yet nothing felt ordinary anymore. Everything felt possible. The months that followed brought the justice I had fought for. Brandon pleaded guilty to fraud charges rather than face a trial, receiving 2 years of probation, mandatory restitution, and a felony record that would follow him for the rest of his life. His career in sales collapsed when his employer learned of the conviction. And last I heard, he was working at a car dealership in a small town 2 hours outside Nashville, living in a cramped apartment and dodging calls from creditors. Vanessa had disappeared entirely, leaving him to face the consequences alone, proving that their grand plans for a future together had been as hollow as his vows to me. Constance and Gregory, humiliated by the scandal, had retreated into denial, insisting to anyone who would listen that their son had been entrapped. But fewer and fewer people believed them as the details became public. As for me, I sit here now, 6 months later, in a thriving business I built with my own hands, surrounded by friends who never doubted my worth, and exploring something new and hopeful with a man who saw my value when I had forgotten it myself. Looking back on everything that happened, I realized that the moment Brandon tried to mock me into silence at that barbecue was actually the moment my real life began. And I would not trade that painful awakening for anything in the world.